I remarried my cheating ex and told his affair son that my kids aren't his siblings and demanded my husband not bring his son to my house ever again. Now, my entitled husband has divorced me. I remarried my husband after we'd already been divorced for 5 years, and I'm the one who said yes to trying again. That's probably important. We had a daughter together before everything fell apart, and I kept telling myself back then that people can actually change if they want to. He cheated, got another woman pregnant, we split, and I spent years learning how to function without him. Then somehow we ended up sitting in counseling together, talking like two reasonable adults about rebuilding something for our daughter. It's been 6 years since we got back together. On paper, it looks stable. We don't fight often. He shows up, he's consistent, he's a good father to both girls. I say both because during those 5 years apart, I had another child with someone else. He wasn't temporary to me. He died unexpectedly when our daughter was still a baby, and I've been raising her on my own ever since. My husband stepped into that without hesitation when we reconciled. He never once made her feel separate. He signs school forms, does bedtime, and corrects her when she's out of line, all of it. If you saw us from the outside, you'd assume we built a normal blended family from scratch, not something patched back together after a mess. We don't talk about the affair anymore. Not really. It came up a lot in the beginning when we were in counseling, and I said everything I thought I needed to say. At some point, it just stopped being a topic. Not because it disappeared, but because there didn't seem to be a point in reopening it every time I felt something about it. Life got busy. Kids, school schedules, bills, work. It's easy to move forward when you're occupied. A few days ago, his ex called. I wasn't even expecting to hear her voice again. Usually, if anything needs to be arranged, it goes through him. She sounded rushed, like she was already halfway somewhere else. She said her job needed her out of state for some opportunity, longer than usual, and she couldn't take their son with her this time. Normally, when she travels, my husband goes to stay near them. He'll get a hotel, spend time with his son there, and keep everything separate. That's just how it's always been handled. I never pushed for anything different, and he never suggested bringing the boy here. There's always been a line, even if we don't openly call it that. This time, she asked if we could take him here instead. Just temporarily, but not a quick overnight situation. Long enough that it would actually change how the house feels. I didn't even think before I said no. I didn't ask questions or try to work out logistics. It was immediate. I just said that wasn't happening. My husband looked at me like I'd overreacted, like I skipped a step in the conversation. He tried to slow it down, saying we should at least talk about it first, that it wasn't some random kid, it was his son. He kept his voice level at first, which almost made it worse because it felt like he was treating me like I was the one being unreasonable. I could feel myself getting tight, like my chest was locking up in that way I haven't felt in a while. It wasn't even about the weekend or the timing. It was just the idea of him being in our space, sleeping in our house, and sitting at our table like everything is equal. He said something about how he's always treated my younger daughter like his own, which is true. I didn't argue that part. But the way he said it, like it was a comparison, like it proved something, made something snap in me. I told him it's not the same. I said it without thinking about how it would land, just that it isn't the same situation. He kept pushing, asking why not, and I could feel myself getting louder without meaning to. I ended up saying that my daughter isn't the result of me betraying him and that I'm not going to sit there and pretend those things are equal. I didn't plan that sentence. It just came out, and the second it did, I could tell by his face that I'd crossed into something else. He got angry in a way I haven't seen in years. Not loud at first, but sharp. He said I was being cruel about a child who didn't do anything wrong. Then he called me a beach, which he hasn't called me since before we divorced. That part stuck more than I expected. I know the boy didn't do anything. I'm not confused about that. But every time I picture him here, it's like something in me goes right back to that period of my life I worked really hard to get past. It's not logical, and I'm aware of that even while I'm feeling it. My husband keeps saying I'm acting like none of the last 6 years mattered, like I agreed to rebuild a family but only under certain conditions that I never actually said out loud. Maybe that's true, I don't know. I thought some things didn't need to be spelt out. We haven't really spoken properly since that argument. He's still taking calls about what to do, and I can tell he's frustrated with me in a way that isn't going away quickly. The house feels off. Not loud, not tense in an obvious way, just different. Like we're both walking around something neither of us wants to touch again, but it's sitting right there anyway. And I keep thinking about how easy it was for me to say no. No hesitation, no discussion, just a hard stop. I'm not sure what that says about me, or about what we actually rebuilt. People's perspective. One said, "Your husband is right about one thing. The child is innocent. But he's also being slippery as hell comparing your late partner's daughter to the son created during his cheating. Those are not emotionally equivalent, and he knows it. Still, he's trying to solve a real parenting problem, while you're responding from an old injury. Basically, he's dealing with logistics, you're dealing with trauma, and both of you are talking past each other." Another one said, "I wouldn't want to deal with that kid either." I know people will clutch pearls about that, but real life isn't that clean. That child is a walking reminder of one of the worst things that ever happened to you. Of course your body reacts before your brain catches up. But here's where you lose me. You remarried him. You didn't just forgive an abstract mistake. You chose to rebuild a life that already included that child. He didn't pop into existence this week. You had years to think about what that meant long term. So yeah, your reaction is human, but your choices don't match your limits. That's on you, not the kid. Third person opinion, I actually get why you reacted so hard. Reconciliation doesn't magically delete humiliation. People act like counseling means you're supposed to smile through every reminder forever. No. But you and your husband clearly rebuilt on top of a sealed-off landmine. He assumed forgiveness meant full integration, and you assumed some boundaries were obvious. Turns out neither of you ever really said the hard part out loud. Follow-up. I told him no again, not softer, not reworded. Just no, the same way I said it the first time, except this time I didn't raise my voice. I think that's what bothered him more. He had already been on his phone that morning, stepping outside twice, then taking a call in the bedroom with the door mostly closed. Not fully. Just enough that I could hear the pacing in his voice without catching exact words. I knew what it was about. He didn't say anything to me before or after, just moved around the house like we weren't in the middle of something. I was packing lunches, trying to keep the routine normal. My older daughter was asking about a school project. My younger one kept forgetting her water bottle. Just regular morning chaos. He walked in at one point and said he might need to adjust his schedule this week. Not asking, just informing. I asked him what that meant. He said, "I'll probably bring him here for a few days, just until things settle." Like it was already decided. Like the conversation we had didn't count because he didn't like the outcome. I didn't yell. I didn't even look at him right away. I just kept cutting fruit, slower than I needed to, and said, "No, you won't." He sighed, the kind that's meant to signal patience, like he's the reasonable one in the room. Said we can't keep going in circles, that this is temporary, that his son needs somewhere stable, not another hotel room. I asked him when exactly that became my responsibility. That's when the tone shifted. He said it's not about responsibility, it's about family. I actually laughed at that, which I probably shouldn't have, but it came out before I could stop it. Not loud, just short. I told him if he wanted to redefine what family includes, he should have been clearer 6 years ago. He didn't like that, said we agreed to rebuild everything together. I said no, we agreed to rebuild us, not expand it into something else entirely. I could feel myself getting sharper with every sentence, even though I was trying to stay calm. My older daughter asked if she could be excused because she could tell something was off. I said yes too quickly. My younger one just sat there, watching both of us like she was trying to figure out which version of us was the real one. He waited until they left the room and then said he's bringing him anyway. I finally looked at him then. I asked him if he understood what he was doing. He said yes, he's taking care of his son. I said no, you're ignoring me in my own house. That's when it slipped out. I said, my house, without thinking about how that would sound, and I saw it land, not confusion, something else, like I'd just confirmed something he'd been feeling for a while. He asked me if that's how I see it. I didn't answer directly. I said this house existed before we got back together, that I built stability here on my own, which is true, but I could hear how it sounded even as I said it. He said, so where exactly do I fit into that? I told him this isn't about him fitting in, it's about me not having to accept everything that came out of his choices. He rubbed his face like he was trying to reset the conversation. Then he said something about how I'm making this harder than it needs to be, that the kids can adjust, that it's not some permanent change. So I went there. I started listing things. School mornings, shared space, bedtime routines, the girls' schedule. I said bringing him here disrupts all of that. I pointed out that our older daughter has exams coming up and that our younger one gets overwhelmed with changes. I said it would throw everything off. The problem is, I could tell halfway through that I was stretching it. Not completely lying, but building it into something bigger than it actually is. He noticed too. He didn't argue each point. He just said, You're making it sound like we run a military operation in here. I told him maybe that's why things work. He didn't respond to that, just shook his head a little. Later that day, I told him if he really wanted to push this, then I needed to meet the boy first. Neutral place. Not here. I said I wasn't agreeing, just considering it. He looked surprised, like he didn't expect me to move even that much. We met 2 days later at a cafe halfway between where his ex lives and where we are. I almost canceled that morning. I sat in my car for a while before going in, just watching people walk past like I could delay it by not moving. The boy was already there with his mother. He looks like my husband. Same eyes, same way of sitting, even the way he held his drink. I kept my distance. I said hello, asked him basic questions, school, what he likes to do, but I didn't lean in. I didn't try to connect. It felt like I was observing, not participating. My husband kept trying to fill the gaps, explaining things about him that I didn't ask. I could feel him watching me, waiting for some sign that I was softening. I wasn't. The ex barely spoke to me directly. She was polite, but detached. At one point, she said she appreciated us even considering helping. I nodded, but I didn't respond. I didn't want to open that door. The whole thing lasted maybe 40 minutes. When we left, my husband asked what I thought. I said, it confirmed what I already knew. He asked me to explain that, and I didn't. I just said I'm not comfortable with him staying here. On the drive back, he didn't talk much. When we got home, he went straight to the bedroom and stayed there longer than usual. Since then, something shifted in smaller ways. Not loud, not obvious, but consistent. He's been on his phone more, especially in the evenings. Longer calls, quieter voice. He steps outside now instead of taking them to another room. I started noticing it more than I probably should. Timing how long he's gone, and how often he checks his phone during dinner. I brought it up once, casually, asking if everything's okay. He said yes, just making sure things are handled. I asked, handled how? He looked at me for a second, then said, in a way that doesn't involve putting him somewhere he's not wanted. That sat there between us. I didn't respond right away. I could have said something to soften it, but instead I said, that's your decision. Which isn't entirely true, but it's the version I'm sticking with. I've also been different with my younger daughter. I didn't notice it at first, but I catch myself now. Sitting closer to her, checking on her more, stepping in quicker when my husband tries to correct her. It's not intentional, but it's happening. He's noticed that too. He hasn't called it out directly, but I can feel it in the way he pauses now, like he's unsure where the line is. Yesterday, he asked again, not about bringing him here, but about the future. Holidays, visits, things like that. Not aggressively. Just asking what I see happening. I told him, I'm not going to pretend something feels normal when it doesn't, that I won't force myself into a version of this that I didn't agree to. He said, you agreed to me. I said, I agreed to you, not everything that came with you. That's when he got quiet again. Not angry, just done with the conversation. Later that night, he said he doesn't think I ever actually forgave him. I just found a way to live around it. I told him that's not fair, but I didn't explain why. Because I'm not sure I can. The other woman made a response. I'm the woman everyone reduces to the affair. I'm not going to pretend that part didn't happen or try to soften it. I knew he was married. I knew exactly what I was doing at the time. It wasn't some accident or emotional confusion. I was in a place where I had nothing stable, no real support, and he walked in offering attention, consistency, and, honestly, a way out of a life I felt stuck in. I took it. That was my decision. And yes, I had his child. My son isn't something I regret. Everything else around it, maybe, but not him. What bothers me now isn't being judged for the affair. I accepted that a long time ago. What bothers me is how the situation actually plays out versus how it's presented. Mira, his wife, likes to come across as someone who rebuilt her life carefully, who set boundaries, and who chose to move forward in a controlled, thoughtful way. And maybe that's how she sees it. But the reality, from where I've been standing for years, is different. Early on, when everything was still messy, she made it very clear that there would be separation. That word came up more than once, not in a screaming way, not dramatically. Calm, controlled, almost polite. She didn't want overlap. Fine, I respected that. I didn't push for anything beyond him seeing his son, so that's what happened. Hotels, short visits, adjusted schedules. My son grew up knowing his dad, but always in these contained pieces of time. It was presented as temporary, like eventually things would settle and become more natural. They never did. And the few times there was any kind of shared space, Mira didn't make a scene. That's the thing. People expect obvious cruelty, yelling, open hostility. It wasn't that. It was small, consistent things that you can't really call out without sounding dramatic. The first time my son met her properly, he told me afterwards that she barely looked at him when he spoke. He said she answered his questions like she was talking to someone else in the room, not him directly. At one point, he tried to show her something on his phone, and she just said, "That's nice," without even glancing down. He noticed that. Another time, he said he got up to grab something from the kitchen, and she stopped him halfway and told him to ask before touching anything because this isn't your house. He's a kid. He went back and sat down and didn't ask for anything else. There was one visit, brief, maybe a couple of hours, where he told me she served snacks to everyone else first. He said he waited, thinking she'd come back around, and she didn't. His dad ended up getting him something later, but by then he'd already clocked it. Again, not something you can point to and say, this is abuse, but it builds. The part that really stuck with me, though, is something he told me recently after that cafe meeting they had. He said she spoke to him when his dad stepped away to take a call. Not long, just a few minutes. He didn't even think to tell me right away because he didn't realize it mattered. He said she asked him if he understood why things were complicated. He told her he thinks so, and she said, "Good, because this situation isn't something I chose. You should remember that." He didn't fully get what she meant, but he said it felt like he was being corrected, like he'd done something wrong without knowing what. Then he told me something else. He hesitated before saying it, like he wasn't sure if he should repeat it. He said she told him, "You have your home. This isn't it. Don't get comfortable thinking it could be." That's not something a child comes up with on his own. That's not a misunderstanding. I sat there listening to him say this, trying not to react too strongly because I didn't want him to feel like he'd said something bad. But it stuck with me in a way I can't ignore. And the thing is, Mira will probably never say any of that out loud in front of other people. She keeps everything just controlled enough to stay reasonable on the surface. I'm not pretending I'm innocent here. I made choices that created this entire situation. I knew he had a wife. I knew there would be consequences. I don't get to rewrite that. But I also don't think Mira gets to position herself as someone who accepted everything when she clearly didn't. She accepted him. That's it. Everything else has been managed, minimized, or pushed to the edges where it's easier to ignore. I've raised my son mostly on my own. His father shows up, yes, but in fragments. Weekends, calls, and occasional longer stretches when things allow it. Meanwhile, Mira gets the version of him that comes home every day, that shares a life, that builds consistency. And even with that, it's still not enough for her to allow space for his other child. I don't regret having my son. I don't regret choosing something for myself when I had nothing else going for me. But I do regret that he's the one who has to navigate this kind of quiet rejection. He's not asking to replace anyone. He's not trying to force his way into their lives. He just wants to exist without feeling like he's crossing a line every time he's near them. And right now, it feels like that line keeps getting drawn tighter around him, while everyone pretends it's just about boundaries and what feels comfortable. At some point, you have to call it what it is. Follow-up from narrator. I saw what she wrote. Someone sent it to me, not even directly, just a screenshot with, "Is this about you?" I knew immediately it was her. Same tone, same way of explaining herself, like she's being honest while carefully choosing what to leave out. I read the whole thing. Twice. And I'm going to say this clearly. A lot of what she wrote about me and about how I've treated her son is either twisted or flat out not true. I never called him names. I never insulted him to his face. I never told him he doesn't belong anywhere or whatever version of that she's trying to imply. What I did say, and I'll own this, is that this is not his home. Because it isn't. She framed it like I singled him out, like I went out of my way to make him uncomfortable. That's not how it happened. I kept things neutral. Distant, yes. Controlled, yes. But not hostile. There's a difference, even if she doesn't want to admit it. And the whole thing about me ignoring him or serving everyone else first, that's her interpretation of moments she wasn't even there for. She's building a narrative out of secondhand retellings from a child who doesn't understand the context of what's happening. I'm not saying he's lying. I'm saying he's a kid trying to make sense of a situation that isn't simple. But reading that, seeing myself described like that, like I'm some quiet villain in his life, it did something, not guilt, something closer to being misrepresented in a way I can't correct without looking worse. My husband saw it too. I didn't show him. He found it on his own. He didn't even ask me if it was true. That's what bothered me the most. He just read it and sat with it, and then later that night he said, "So that's how you see him. It is not accurate, just that. I told him it wasn't. I went point by point, explaining exactly what I did and didn't say. He listened, but not the way he used to. Not like he was trying to understand me, more like he was comparing versions. At some point, I got frustrated and said, "You really think I'd talk to a child like that?" And he didn't answer right away. That pause was enough. That's when the argument actually started. I told him she was manipulating the situation, that she'd been doing that for years, positioning herself as the one who had to struggle while conveniently ignoring the choices she made. I said she's using her son to force her way into a space she was never part of. He said, or she's just asking for help. I laughed at that. I couldn't help it. I said, no, she's asking to change the terms. From there, it just kept escalating. I brought up things I hadn't said out loud before. That I don't trust her intentions. That I don't believe this is just about a temporary situation. That once he's here, it doesn't stay temporary. It shifts everything. He said everything is already shifting because of me. That's when I lost my patience. I said, your son is not my responsibility, and I'm not going to build my life around fixing what you created. He stared at me for a second, like he didn't recognize me. Later that week, we went back to counseling. It didn't feel like before. Before, it was about rebuilding. This time, it felt like clarification. The therapist asked directly how I see his son fitting into our family. I didn't soften it. I said he doesn't. I said, I don't see him as part of my family, and I don't think I ever will. My husband didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He just nodded once, like he was filing it away. The therapist tried to explore that and asked if there's any version of compromise. I said I'm willing to be respectful, but I'm not willing to integrate something that originated from betrayal into my home. Again, I could hear how that sounded, but I didn't correct it. After that session, things changed quickly. I tried to offer a structured compromise a couple days later. I told him if he really needed to bring his son here, then there would have to be clear limits. Time frames, space boundaries. No disruption to the girls' routines, no assumption of shared parenting. I laid it out like a plan. He read through it and just said, this isn't a home, this is containment. I said it's called structure. He said it's called rejection. That same night, I caught myself doing something else I hadn't planned. My younger daughter mentioned him and called him her brother. Just casually. I corrected her immediately. I didn't raise my voice, but I was firm. I said, he's your father's son. She looked confused, asked what the difference was. I tried to explain it logically, but there isn't a version of that explanation that doesn't sound off when you say it out loud. My husband was in the room for that. He didn't step in, he just watched. Later, he asked me why I needed to correct that. I said because words matter. He said, so does what you're teaching them. After that, things got quieter but heavier. I started making changes in the house. Not big announcements, just adjustments, moving things around, locking the office because I didn't want shared access, reorganizing the girls' rooms so there wasn't extra space that could be interpreted as available. He noticed. Of course he did. He asked me one night if I was trying to make a point or just making sure I didn't have to deal with the situation at all. I said both. He didn't argue. After that, he stopped pushing, not because he agreed, because he was done trying to convince me. He started making other arrangements, staying away more. At first it was just overnight here and there, then longer stretches. He said it was easier to manage things that way instead of forcing conflict at home. I told people, friends, a couple of family members, that I feel like I'm being pushed out of my own space, that decisions are being made without me, and that I'm expected to just accept changes I never agreed to. Some of them agreed with me. Enough that it reinforced what I was already thinking. But at home, the reality is different. He's barely here now. He still comes by, still sees the girls, but it's not the same. It feels scheduled, controlled in a way I didn't expect. Last night, he told me he's not going to force his son into a place where he's clearly not wanted. And he's also not going to limit his role as a father to fit inside my boundaries. I said, so what does that mean? He said, it means I'm figuring out what my life looks like without trying to make those two things coexist. He didn't say separation. He didn't say anything final, but it didn't need to be said. And I'm still sitting here thinking I didn't do anything unreasonable. That I set a boundary and stuck to it. Even now, after everything that shifted, I still think that. I just don't think I expected how much everything else would move around it. Follow-up. He had papers drawn up before I realized he'd actually stopped trying. No big conversation first, no last argument. He came over in the afternoon like it was any other day, sat down at the table, and slid an envelope toward me. I thought it was something to sign for school or maybe a bill. It wasn't. I read it all the way through. I didn't rush it, didn't skim. I wanted to understand exactly what he was asking for before reacting. He just sat there while I read, not fidgeting, not explaining, not softening anything. When I finished, I asked him if this was really what he wanted or if this was just where we'd ended up after the last few weeks. He said, "It's where we've been heading for a while. I just stopped pretending it wasn't." I told him I never stopped him from being a father. I said that clearly because I needed him to hear it from me, not from whatever version he's built in his head. I said he could see his son, spend time, do whatever he needed. I wasn't interfering with that. He said, "You weren't interfering, you were containing it." I didn't respond to that right away. He explained that he doesn't want to keep living in two separate versions of his life, one that exists here and one that exists somewhere else, that he's tired of adjusting everything depending on which space he's in. I said, "That's called compromise." He shook his head and said, "No, this was management." After that, the conversation stayed calm in a way that didn't feel calm. He wasn't trying to convince me of anything. That part was already over. He told me he's found a place, not too far, but not close enough to feel like he's still living here. He said the girls can stay primarily with me, that their routines don't need to change, he'll work around them. I asked him if this really needed to be permanent. He said, "I don't think there's a version where we both get what we want." I didn't argue that, because I knew exactly what he meant and I didn't have a different answer to offer. We told the girls together that evening, kept it simple. Said he'd be staying somewhere else for now, that nothing about how much he cares about them changes. My older one didn't say much, just nodded like she was processing it in her own way. My younger one asked if this meant he wasn't coming home anymore. He hesitated for a second before answering. That second felt longer than anything else that day. Since then, he comes by, sees the girls, keeps things structured, almost careful. And I'm still here, in the same house, with everything exactly where I wanted it. Nothing changed in the space, just who's in it. Analysis. There's something uncomfortable about this whole situation that people keep circling but not naming directly, so I'm just going to say it. This isn't actually about the kid, and it's not even really about the affair anymore. What you're watching play out is what happens when someone builds a life on managed pain instead of resolved pain, and then mistakes that management for healing. Mira didn't forgive. She optimized. That's the part that's interesting here. She didn't scream, didn't leave permanently, didn't blow up her life. Instead, she created a version of reality where she could function, clear lines, controlled environments, limited exposure to anything that reminded her of what happened. And to be fair, that worked for years. The house ran smoothly. The marriage looked stable. The kids had structure. But that system only works as long as nothing forces expansion. The moment reality asked for flexibility, not even permanent change, just temporary overlap, the entire thing cracked. Not because she's cruel, but because her healing was never built to include discomfort. It was built to avoid it. And here's where it gets more layered. The husband made the opposite mistake. He treated reconciliation like a moral reset. Like if enough time passed and he showed up consistently, everything attached to the affair would eventually be absorbed into normal life. He assumed proximity would lead to acceptance. So now you've got two completely different contracts that were never actually spoken out loud, she thought. We're rebuilding us, with limits. He thought, we're rebuilding everything, eventually. That gap sat quietly for 6 years. The kid didn't create the problem, he exposed it. And the reason Mira comes across so harsh isn't just what she said, it's the consistency of her internal logic. She's not slipping, she's aligned with herself. That's why even when things fall apart, she still believes she's reasonable. That's what makes this situation more unsettling than your typical conflict. There's no villain twirling their mustache here, just two people who made decisions that felt survivable at the time, and now those decisions don't scale. Also, pay attention to something subtle. She keeps redefining language. Family, home, responsibility. She narrows those words until they fit what she can tolerate. That's not random, that's how people protect themselves when they can't expand emotionally. If the definition doesn't include the problem, then the problem doesn't belong. But reality doesn't care about definitions. The husband eventually stops arguing not because he agrees, but because he realizes this isn't a negotiation. You can't logic someone out of a boundary that's built on unresolved emotion. And the real cost shows up quietly. He doesn't leave in a dramatic way. He redistributes himself. That's the ending most people miss. No explosion, no final speech. Just a life that slowly reorganizes around what each person refuses to bend on. If there's anything to take from this, it's this. You can absolutely build a stable life on top of something broken. People do it all the time. But if that stability depends on certain realities staying out of sight, then it's not stability, it's containment. And containment always fails the moment life stops cooperating.